Hello everyone. I recently picked up this 9-inch woodworker's vise that's made by ShopFox for just some various projects to throw on the end of my workbench. And when I was researching these, I really couldn't find that much information. Pretty much all of them looked about the same, and I suspect that many of them are pretty much identical. So what I wanted to do is kind of do a little overview and maybe a quick teardown just to kind of show you what these things look like, because quite frankly, when you get it and see it in person, it is kind of surprising the quality in some places and the design decisions in others. So let's just kind of do a quick overview of this vise so that you have a better idea what you would be purchasing when you're looking at one of these vises. So I want to start by giving you some kind of basic information about the vise. This is a 9-inch quick release wood vise. The model is D4328 by ShopFox, and as I said in the beginning, I suspect that many of these models are probably identical. So if you go with a different model or a different brand, I'm guessing that they're all going to be very similar, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this video. So yeah, this is going to be 9 inches. It has a maximum opening, I think it says here, of 10 inches. It's relatively heavy. It's 25 pounds. It's, a beefy little thing. And it's made for a workbench thickness of 2 1/4. So that means that the distance from here up to here is going to be 2 1/4 inches. So if you have a thinner workbench, you're going to need to shim it. And if you have a thicker one, I don't know, you have a really thick workbench. The distance from here to here, which was important for me, is, I guess, sitting at about 4 1/2, maybe 4 5/8, it looks like. It would be really, really nice if in this little manual thing that they include, if they had some kind of dimensional drawing, because you're meant to mount this to something. Having some sort of dimensions would be really fantastic. And while I'm here, if I close this up fully, the distance from here, the back of this face, which would go against your workbench, to the end of the lead screw, let's say it's about 14 1/2 inches. So that is about how much depth, or I guess width, or whatever you want to call it, you're going to need underneath your bench. So you've got your 4 mounting holes, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are maybe comically large, given what you're probably going to be screwing this into, but they are quite large. I think they're 1/2 inch is what the dimensions are. I can probably double check that real quick. Yeah, about 1/2 inch. So you got a 1/2 inch clearance between these 4. These are slotted, these are through holes, pretty simple stuff. And then you have this little tab here. This is for bench dogs. I'm not a big woodworker, but the idea is that you'd have this sitting perfectly flush with your workbench. This would raise up, lock in place, and then you could clamp against something. We'll go into this lovely feature later. And then you have your handle, and then you have a quick release. The quick release doesn't really operate here on the bench. Let me turn it upside down. So the quick release is just this janky little spring-loaded mechanism that releases the nut. Will it even? Oh yeah, it doesn't work when it's closed. So releases it from the nut, and then this slides out theoretically. So yeah, so that's kind of what you're looking at. And then in terms of mounting the actual jaws, this is not necessarily meant to use these jaws. You're meant to provide your own jaws. And there's a couple holes here and a couple holes there for mounting the jaws into the metal jaws of the vise. So here's the underneath side, and it kind of gives you a little bit better look at the quick release mechanism and some of the casting. You see some marks here. This is from me filing this down because this was just really nasty and rough. And you can kind of get a better idea of what the casting looks like. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's not a very clean casting, and I guess it's okay. It's okay. That doesn't really hurt anything, but appearance-wise, it just looks very, very rough. This quick release mechanism is fine, I guess. You basically have this half nut that rests into the lead screw, and this little spring load thing lifts it up and off. When it's mounted, it does seem to work fine. The guide rails are kind of more of the problem. We'll get to that later. This mechanism does work. The thing that is interesting is when I fully disassembled this, when I got it just for fun, this bar is actually kind of off-centered, and if you don't get that just right, this mechanism won't work. So it kind of makes me believe that this thing was put together and drilled all by hand, because if this is centered, this would catch, and if you flip it around the other side, it definitely is off-center and catches. So everything kind of seems like it was put together by hand, and you can maybe see this bar kind of goes off in one direction. It's not exactly straight, it kind of moves around quite a bit, and as the vise opens up more, this mechanism operates differently because this is kind of at the wrong angle. So it works good on some places, but then as you open up, it works worse. It's not really all that consistent. So here is, I don't know what this piece is, but this is the casting that goes like that. So this is the thing that mounts actually underneath the workbench. And kind of give you a better look at the casting underneath there. It's really rough up against this side, and there's like a burr right there that I almost cut myself on. What's interesting is this is the face that is going against your workbench, and you know this, a little bit of its weight, but this thing is just kind of a little wobbly. It doesn't really have a flat face here. And the interesting thing is if we take a square, there's really not a square point along here. This is very much cupped like this. It's not really square to this backside. Now, I realize that this is a little over $100. I didn't expect this to be ground, you know, perfectly at a 90-degree angle, but it's just kind of interesting to me that this is kind of your reference point, right? This 90-degree angle is what mounts to the underside of your bench. This really isn't that even close to a 90-degree angle. I'm not even sure. Yeah, it's not really even touching this much. So when you're mounting it, it's going to hit here and hit there, but not really hit there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. For the actual guide rails that travel through this piece, since this is the moving piece with the nut, there's really nothing going on here. There is paint inside these holes, so this is where the rails go inside of. They're a little bit rough. They're smoother than most. It looks like they were possibly machined. It's not just rough casting in there, but there is definitely paint inside, so you know, they're just kind of meant to fit roughly inside there as a guide, and this thing is kind of sloppy. It will kind of slide around. These are literally just through holes. These aren't really guides at all. They're just holes in the casting. That's about it. Now, I fully realize that this is not a precision machining vise. I do have a Kurt over there on one of my milling machines, and I do realize what this is. This is a $110 woodworking vise. I get it. I'm just kind of pointing out some things that I noticed when, you know, I was tearing it apart and whatnot. Here's the two linear rails. I think they're like 21 millimeters. I couldn't actually get a good reading on them. I don't think they're that standard. They're a little bit rough, and they actually feel relatively soft. I can actually, you know, scar them pretty easily or scratch them pretty easily. And taking a file, yeah, they're very soft. I mean, you can very easily leave a pretty heavy gouge in them with a relatively cheap file. So I guess that's fine. They're, you know, moving against that other surface that I showed earlier, so maybe the two of them will just kind of wear into each other. But you're definitely going to get some pretty significant wear on these because it's pretty soft. The lead screw. The lead screw is one of my favorite things. I'm doing this because this is sharp. I mean, this is like cut your hands sharp. Give you an idea. Yeah, it's just taking wood off of this. It is extremely sharp. I know this is on the underside, and you know it's not going to really come into contact with you, but there is no deburring on this whatsoever, and you can really catch your skin on this. It is that sharp. So it's just a really rough piece, and if we look over here at the casting, There's no bearing in here, which I guess I wouldn't expect that from something at this price, but there is a ton of wiggle room, and given that this isn't hardened, you know, this thing is just going to get sloppier and sloppier over time. I guess that's okay. For the other end of this, you basically just have this plate that is kind of snapped into there, and there is a thrust washer. It's just basically a spring washer, one of these flexible washers that just presses against the end with another flat washer against it. So that's your thrust bearing, is basically just this little spring washer. So yeah, I didn't really expect for this to have, you know, angular contact bearings or something like that preloaded, blah, 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 blah. I didn't expect that, but I was just kind of, you know, laughed a little bit when I saw that is their bearing solution for this whole assembly. And here is what it looks like when the jaws meet up. Surprisingly, and to its credit, the jaws actually line up pretty decently. And when you do close this thing together, you can pretty obviously see that I think they just ground these two pieces together. They just clamped it and then just ran an angle grinder across the top really quick. You do see a gap at the bottom, and as I loosen it, it kind of grows a little bit. That is by design. These things are meant to kind of come together like that, because for woodworking, you kind of want that, whatever it is, that angle to kind of clamp and pull it down. So that is actually by design, and that's totally fine. I got no issue with that. So now I'm going to mount this to my workbench, and since my workbench isn't that deep, I made this little kind of shim spacer out of some MDF, so it'll sit like that. It moves it out a little bit because I don't want it interfering with the legs of my workbench, and then moves it down, so this should be roughly flush with the workbench. For the bottom mounting, I'm using these 3/8 inch lag bolts, and then some number 10, I think 2.5 inch, that will go in from the front like that. So here it is installed on my workbench. As you can see, this turns. Push this, pull it out, comes out, push it. Everything works as you would expect it to work. My workbench is relatively thin, as you can see here, so the shimming worked out okay. It's maybe a little bit proud on one side and a little bit low, maybe about right on the other side. It was really hard to get this all lined up and centered with the shim. It might be easier without the shim, but as I said before, this isn't really flat, so it kind of just does whatever it does when you want to screw it in. I also added a couple little chamfers here on this little bench dog, and that actually worked out really nice. It works perfectly fine now. Just adding that little bit of a bevel with a sander was all it needed. Yeah, generally speaking, I mean, it does what you need it to do. You can open it up, put in a piece of wood, clamp it down, and that is in there about as good as you could expect. Your release is nice. If you want to do something larger, pull that out, put it in, tighten it up. That is in there. So it's a vise. It does vise-like things. It clamps. I think the only issue I have is I'm kind of like awkwardly off camera because I'm filming this, and if you don't operate this dead on, it is actually really not smooth. It is really hard to pull it out and push it back in unless you're directly in front of it. And like I said, I'm kind of at an awkward angle right now, so maybe that's not entirely fair. When it's pulled out, this kind of gives you an idea of how much play there is. There's quite a bit of wiggle room. And when you clamp something in, generally, it doesn't flex a whole lot. It does a good job. So, you know, as a vise, it does what it's supposed to do. As a YouTuber, I'm definitely tempted to create this thumbnail that has like a big question mark, like, should you avoid this vise? And then at the end of this, I'm supposed to give this nice little talk about how, you know, you should avoid this at all costs and get this other brand that I have an affiliate link with. It's fine for $110. It's totally fine. It clamps stuff. Is it a pleasure to use? No. Will I enjoy using it? No. Will it be useful in my shop? Yes. It's a perfectly serviceable tool, and that's about all there is to it. On a grading scale, maybe 3 out of 5 is what I'm going to give it on Amazon. And, you know, if I'm going with like a school grading scale, I'd give it a solid B-. Fit and finish, the actual function of the thing, just how it feels and how it operates, is like maybe a C- or a D, but it actually in spite of itself, does what it's supposed to do. You can really clamp something in there, and this is practically a part of my workbench now. So in terms of it doing what I need it to do, it's, you know, a B+, something like that. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing things out. So there you have it. This is what this vise is like. It's fine. Is it worth the $110? You're going to have to make that decision. I really couldn't find anything significantly nicer than this without spending gobs more money. So I think at the price point, this is really the only option you're going to have. I am going to add some different jaws on here, maybe like some MDF jaws there. I am going to do some 3D printed like V jaws and stuff like that. And I'm going to be using these screws as kind of a dowel pin hole. So I'll do all magnetic ones because I'll probably be switching them and, you know, just throw them somewhere here on the legs of the bench. But yeah, overall, I'd say a good solid B-, maybe C+, depending on how you look at it. It's perfectly fine, but whoever designed this had zero passion, didn't care what they were doing. There's nothing clever in the design. It was just to try and make it as cheap as possible, and that's about it. So this is the video that I wish had been out there and I wish I had watched before I had bought this. I probably still would have bought it, but I would have had a different expectation when I got it. So hopefully this gives you a little bit better idea of what these vises are actually like, because there's a whole bunch of them on eBay and Amazon and everywhere else, and they're all about the same price. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information for your purchasing decision. As always, check me out on my Facebook page for any updates to my channel, and see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.